friends, and thanks for joining me again. And today I want to talk about renting versus buying. Of course, anyone who's been on my channel for any length of time knows what a big fan of homeownership I am. But does that mean that I believe that renting is a waste of money? Well, to be honest with you, absolutely not. I believe that both renting and homeownership both have their time and place, and most of us have to have times of either one for varying lengths of time. So there's nothing wrong with doing either one at different times in our lives when we need to. So it's really more about defining when in our time in our life, or what goals we have going on at that moment, each one is most appropriate. So let's go through the pros and cons of each really quickly, and then it really becomes very obvious as to which one is right at this particular time in life. So don't worry if you can't read this. I can barely read this. Anyway, I'll explain all of it anyway. So the first pro about renting would be that there is usually lower or no maintenance. This isn't always true. Sometimes you rent, a single family house or something like that where you may have to do your own yard work, but in general, most of the time when you're renting, a duplex, an apartment, whatever, even sometimes houses, a lot of the maintenance is taken care of by the landlord. And this could be inside or outside. So it may not only be just yard care and things like that outside, but inside as well. If you have a landlord who isn't taking care of things, like if your fridge breaks and they're not fixing it, they're probably not doing what they're supposed to do, because that is required of them to keep you with things that are necessary. So the roof, keep it from leaking, all this sort of stuff, hot water, they're all basics and they need to be provided by your landlord. So when things break, not only do you not have to cover the cost of them, but you usually don't have to spend your time, achieving these things either. So that's definitely a huge pro of, being a renter, is that we don't have to, have all of that expense and time. The second one would be low move-in cost. Now this one I put a question mark because not always, I should say, do you always have to have a lot of money in order to be a homeowner. So there are a lot of really cool programs out there for homeowners that are like no down money, no money down, or very low amounts of money down. I mean, there was a program that was just unrolled like a couple weeks ago. I was talking to a lender recently where there's a government grant at the moment where they will cover 2% of your down payment. So if you wanted a conventional loan at 3%, you only have to come up with the other 1%. Or if you have an FHA loan, they'll start at 3.5%, you would have to only come up with the 1.5%, and then the grant covers the rest. So, when you really look at this stuff, or the USDA loans, I mean, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent here, but there are some USDA loans that are truly zero down. So when you put, say $1,000 toward your earnest money while you have the house, tied up in contract, when you sign on the line and you buy the house, you get your earnest money right back. So yeah, absolutely no money down. And so sometimes putting a security deposit on a, apartment may be cheaper, and sometimes buying a house may be cheaper. So usually in general, renting, has a lower startup cost, but not always, like I said. You can move if you need to when you're a renter much more easily, even if you're in a lease. Sometimes, if you can help find someone to, take over your lease or sublet, or sometimes your landlord will just let you out of your lease with a portion of your security deposit, being taken. But it's much easier to move when you have, a rental place that you're renting rather than a house that you're buying. And so if you have a house that you own, obviously you would have to sell that before you can move. So if you know that you're going to move within the next year or two, maybe even as far as 3 years out, it may be better to just go ahead and rent. However, if you know you're going to be staying in a specific area or place for 2 or 3 years or longer, it may be a better idea to try to go ahead and buy. Because then by then you'll have enough equity built up. But that's in the other section for the pros of home ownership. So when you own a house, it's just a much bigger commitment. So let's go over the pros of buying. The first one would be pride of ownership. This is sort of a phrase that's coined for the fact that areas that have a lot of home ownership and not as many rentals tend to be taken better care of. Now, of course, there are always exceptions to the rules. There are, homeowners that just totally let their property go, and then there are renters who just take immaculate care of their properties. But in general, the areas that have the highest levels of home ownership do tend to have, the areas being taken care of better. People will pick up the trash. They won't, litter. They won't let their grass go. They won't usually keep stuff that isn't supposed to go outside, these sorts of things. And so pride of ownership can definitely make it to where you have a nicer area where you're living, or just in general nicer neighborhoods. Privacy, this is kind of a big one. So when you are a renter, sometimes your landlord will do periodic inspections, or they have to do like routine spraying or whatever for, insects and stuff. And so they're in your apartment or your home more often. When you're a homeowner, you get to choose when or how that sort of stuff happens, and there's no inspections because nobody's watching out for what you're doing or what the cleanliness of your house is. So you definitely have a lot more privacy when you are a homeowner. You can write off things on your taxes, such as your insurance, the property taxes you pay, even maintenance, stuff like that. You don't typically get these sorts of tax write-offs when you're a renter, but I did do a video about this and the tax write-offs associated with homeownership and whether or not it's good to keep a mortgage just for the tax write-offs. So if you want to check that out, it'll be linked over there or below. And then, but just really quickly, all of the time when you write this stuff off, it's not a 100% tax benefit. So the amount that you write off, you only get back a certain amount or have to owe the government less because of that. It's not 100%. So do keep that in mind. While the write-offs can be nice, there are obviously some drawbacks to that as well, since they're not as good as they seem to be sometimes. The house that you have and that you own appreciates in value. So this means when you buy the house, most of the time, unless we have a market that's kind of, declining or crashing, oftentimes what will happen is you'll buy the house and then the next year it'll be worth a little more, and the next year it'll be worth a little more, and the next year it'll be worth a little more. Here in northern Colorado, where I live, the houses double in value every 12 years. So the house that we bought back in '04 is worth about double, a little over actually, what we paid for it then. And so, yeah, when you buy a house, it's going to tick up in value, which makes buying a house obviously a very good investment. So that is definitely a huge perk to home ownership. Closely related to that would be equity. So when your house appreciates, that money that you have built up in it is equity, but there's a second part to that. It's also the payment that you're making. So when you make a payment to your rent, all of that money basically essentially disappears. So, but when you make a mortgage payment, what frequently happens is a portion of that money goes to interest, and then a portion of it goes toward buying down your principal, which can also accumulate additional equity in your property. So, having some of the money that you're paying going towards something that you could tap into later if you need to sell, if you want to refinance, whatever the case may be, is definitely a huge perk, because when you rent, you can't get any of that money back at any point ever. So for the most part, again, unless you're like renting to own or some other kind of program like that. But in general, you can actually build up some good equity when you're a homeowner as opposed to being a renter. When you have a home that you are buying, you have the ability to pay it off, which for me feels like a light at the end of the tunnel. Instead of feeling like you've got this payment month after month after month forever, like you would if you were renting, eventually you can pay a house off. Another cool thing is that frequently houses will go down with their payments. So like our last house, we bought it and we only had like, I think 5% down to put, down. So when we got to the 20% mark where we owed 80% and we owned 20% of the equity, we were able to get rid of the private mortgage insurance. So whereas rents will increase and mortgages will frequently decrease, which is fabulous. So I didn't put that on the board. I just thought of that as I was going along. But yeah, rents continue to go up and they never, ever, ever end. Whereas a home ownership, you will end up probably having that payment, or you could potentially have that payment depending on what the taxes and insurance are going to cost you. But the payment could potentially decrease, which is really nice too. The moral of the story in the end is whether you rent or whether you buy, you pay for the space you occupy, which I think is a really good saying. So you're going to have to pay for something either way. So a lot of the people who say, oh, renting's the best way to go, you know, homeownership, you totally get screwed. I definitely disagree with that. I've been a huge fan of homeownership, and I'm trying every day to help other people achieve that goal as well, now that I am a real estate professional. So honestly, again, like I said in the beginning of this video, I don't necessarily think that either one of these are the right option. They're both the right option for people at different times in their lives. So there you go, the pros and cons of renting versus buying, and who I believe should best fit into each categories. I hope you found this video helpful. I'm Frugal Green Girl, and we'll see you next time. And if you live in the northern Colorado area and you're looking for a real estate professional, go ahead and give me an email at stawny7@gmail.com, and I would love to help you.